Okay, so hello and welcome to the Revenue Revolution podcast, sponsored by Jointflows. Today we are joined by Kieran Smith, the go-to-market enablement and productivity manager at Staffbase, covering EMEA and APAC. So that must be interesting in terms of managing time zones, I guess. So we can dig a little bit into that as well. But thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, my job title is quite long. Is that it's when people ask outside of situations, I say I just do enablement because it's like go-to-market enablement and productivity for EMEA and APAC, and I also look after partner enablement globally as well. But I've just taken that out of the job title because otherwise it becomes a little bit like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely. I think I mean we're going to cover a broad range of topics today, but we were just speaking about something which I think is really relevant before we actually started recording the podcast as well. So obviously you're very new to the role, so you're 3 or 4 months into this current role, and you spoke a little bit about your decision-making process in terms of how you decided where you wanted to work, what was important to them, and therefore, what enablement actually means. It'd be great to talk a little bit about that to begin with, where you're seeing how people are maybe not defining enablement in a way which you think is suitable, and why that is.
yeah, no, I was quite conscious about where I wanted to go. It was quite a big move for me going from a company I was at where I was. It was a smaller team, so we had an enablement team of 4, and then we went down to 3 when someone moved internally. And it was part of a high growth company, so we were responsible for lots of different things a lot of the time. But within that, I sort of found my passions within enablement, which was all about making an impact, moving the needle. Basically the reasons I wanted to get into enablement. So then when I was looking at a few different companies, Staffbase stuck out a mile based on their interview process, based on the questions that we're asking, based on the person that I'd be reporting into. So I would think, even if I was to look at it and like the company, the way that they look, the way that they approach the interview process, and then the person I'd be reporting into, the company, fantastic. The way that they approached the interview process, everything was based around impact. It was all around numbers, metrics, how are you going to make an impact, their word is, how are you going to make enablement legendary here at Staffbase. And then my boss is exceptionally experienced, and she was also experienced in areas that I wasn't, and I wanted to learn those things. Like, she comes from like a strategy background at a massive company, so I chose all of those things. But to suppose to differentiate them more objectively, to say, I spoke to a few companies at the time, and lots of companies were still missing the mark, in my opinion, of what they expected from enablement. They were still very focused on onboarding. They were still very focused on tool rollout and tool adoption. Still very focused on training sessions and playbooks and stuff like that. Now, these are all great things, and these are all necessary things, but for me, they're 5 or 6 levels away from the North Star. And for me, the North Star is revenue, and it's called revenue enablement for a reason, other than sales or CS. It's all about, how do you help the team perform better and achieve more revenue. And as I said, Staffbase stuck out because they're so focused on enablement, and we've got our overall global team is like 17 people for enablement. So we believe in it a lot, right? It's huge, and we've got like 1,000 people. So by enablement standards, that's a really big team. But I mean, Staffbase, they don't just talk the talk, they walk the walk. They have high expectations of what it is that we do and the impact that we're going to make. And I say that's really what made them stand out compared to everybody else I spoke to.
Yeah. This is sorry. I was gonna say, this is very interesting because we had someone else on the podcast from the enablement world, Kapadia, and he said the exact same thing as you said. The enablement needs to be about revenue and revenue impact. Where do you see in today's world successful organization enabling enablement essentially in the right way? What's happened when they do it well, and what happens when they don't do well?
Well, firstly, Kunal's a good friend of mine, and he's been a massive support to me in my career. So it's no surprise that you've had him on here. He's like one of the main thought leaders, in my opinion, on this subject, moving from operational to strategic enablement. I think there is a bit of a shift. There's a shift within the enablement community. There is a bit of a shift in expectations from companies on enablement. But I think if you really want to set enablement up for success, it's probably similar to what Canal said, but they need to be involved at the initial conversations. So if you're talking about, you know, percentage growth or whatever it may be, you know, ARR, or whether that be net retained revenue, enablement needs to be involved at that level of conversation. We need to be there to understand, is this just a number that you're putting on it? Like, how can we help with our understanding and strategy of helping us get there? And then we work backwards from there. So we go revenue, and then we maybe look at the sales velocity equation, for example, if similar to Canal. Then we come back from there and we'll look at the competencies or the levers that we can pull within each of those, and the competencies that come into that. And then we come all the way down to the bottom of, okay, now we get to the enablement part. So now that we've got the numbers and we've broken down the competencies, how do we execute on that? What's the best enablement formats? How do we communicate? Is it different regionally versus globally? Is it a new message? What tools do we have at our disposal? And I think that's the sort of conversations we should be having. They have to be strategic. So we have to be involved in the strategic conversations, whether that's just, you know, the head of sales enablement, but that's what has to guide everything. It does become operational, of course it does, because we have to execute on that vision. But if you're only being dictated to in terms of the vision, you're not really going to understand it. So you need to be involved somewhat in those conversations. And I know that every department wants a seat at the table, but even if we're just talking about like leadership offsites for revenue leadership, there should be some sort of enablement presence there. And I come across this, like, we have our truth in enablement for our worldview, and then you have the sales managers who have their truth, then you have the leaders who have their truth, and then for me, what we do is we take all of those subjective things, we wrap some data around it, and then we work back from the North Star, and where do we get to from there? So let's take my opinion, your opinion, and then let's look at it through the lens of data. Yeah. And to go to the other side, you've got people, again, we sort of mentioned it before, where people were talking about just onboarding, right, or just tool adoption, or nice playbooks and stuff like that. And I say these are all things that are important, but to what end? And I think my favorite question that I ask, and it's a little bit obtuse, but it's so what, right? We need a new playbook, or we've created a new playbook for this team. So what? What are we measuring? What's the baseline metric? Where do we want to go? What's the timeline? Realistically, that's what enablement's for, right? And most people don't even get a baseline. And he's going, that's nice. We did a really good session. Says who?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think what I'm seeing more and more now is that enablement are actually being part of the process in terms of putting together the plan, the go-to-market plan, how we're going to achieve our goals. And where I'm seeing it fall short is actually when you just brought in as an afterthought. Here, enablement, we've got this tool, as you said, can you roll that out for us? But once again, as you said, to what end? And speaking about that in terms of what end and the part that enablement play in the strategy of the actual business itself, in today's market, with things becoming more and more complex in terms of buying processes and, you know, timelines, number of stakeholders involved and so forth, how do you see enablement's role evolving, if at all? And what role specifically do you think enablement play in achieving those targets?
Well, my philosophy on enablement is we should almost be like an internal consultant. And so we're almost like the connective tissue between RevOps, sales, execution in terms of like the actual sales teams, a little bit of marketing, a little bit of strategy. And we are the people that sort of pull all these people into the same room. Quite often these conversations are siloed. For example, if you've got a new process that's been rolled out from RevOps, why is it being rolled out? Who does it affect? We can do a session together to talk about that. If we've got messaging for marketing, who is it for? Why are we doing it? What are the key terms that we want to look for? If we've got a new tool, like the phrase I used just before we started recording is, quite often nowadays people are throwing technology at a process issue or a process problem or a will problem. I think it's, for me, I see enablement's role as being that strategic internal consultant and always being sort of the why guy or the why girl and asking, why are we doing this? What's the reason behind it? Again, people, like, for example, you have a conversation like, oh, we need objection handling training. Okay, based on what? Right? But, and again, just because that's one person's worldview doesn't mean that it's wrong. but also let's interrogate it a little bit. I think so for too long, enablement has just been like order takers. And I, as I say, I look at it from a strategic partnership internally, whereas lots of companies look at enablement as sales support. And I don't, do we support sales? I suppose, yes, we kind of do in terms of the execution. But if we're looking at the enablement function, we're a strategic partner for the business. And I think businesses who look at enablement that way and rightly hold enablement to that level of expectation, I think that's the right thing to do. I think if you just, like, there was a phase years ago where people were getting more VC money if they had an enablement function, right? But what they just got one, right? They just got one. But they were just like, oh, we'll just do onboarding. And honestly, like, even in an interview process, like, oh, or even now, like, you speak to some leaders like, we're not hiring that much, let's revamp onboarding right now. Like, what do you mean? Like, why are we not hiring people? Because you just had to let people go. Well, why did we let people go? Because we weren't performing well. Maybe we should focus on the performance. Never mind onboarding, because we're going to hire someone in 6 months, right? Let's focus where the problem is now, because it's probably going to take us a quarter, or if not longer, to fix. So when we're not performing, what does that mean? Is it not enough opportunities? Are we, the deals taking too long? Is the average order value? Are we not selling a platform? What is it? But we can make a difference today in enablement and sales if we work together, as opposed to let's just do onboarding, which we may or may not see results in for 12 months, right? Especially in enterprise, your ramp-up time is maybe 9 to 18 months. So why are we borrowing on onboarding right now? We should be talking about sales performance, because we're revenue enablement, not onboarding. I think that's again the difference between strategic and operational.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I like it. I've got a sports background, and I see enablement very much as your long-term coach, where you have to kind of understand what the end goal is, where you're currently sitting, and kind of map out what's required to get there along the way. It can be skill set, it can be optimization of specific metrics, but that strategic planning needs to be happening above you, basically. And something you said, Kieran, around impact, and you alluded to being able to have like an attribution model, understand impact. What's the best way for enablement to calculate the actual impact of their effort on the bottom line numbers?
Well, yeah, this is the biggest question, right? Because we can influence sales rather than impact them. But it's a question that we should be asking nonetheless. So I think for me, we've got lots of tools nowadays, right? So again, if we were to break down the priorities, look at which lever do we want to pull, whether it's higher average order value, whatever that may be. I think the biggest thing that people miss, and I think I said this earlier, is people don't get a baseline, right? So they don't know where they're going. You say, we want more. Okay, well, what does that mean? If it's more revenue, okay, that's cool, but what does that mean in terms of how many deals at X price? Is it more deals? Is it? So again, it's what's the baseline? Where are we right now? Calculate that. So we've taken the approach internally here is when we get an enablement request, it's got to be linked to an OKR. It's got to have some metrics. We've got to understand what the metric is, where we want to move it, what's the timeline in which we're doing that. Is that possible? Is that feasible? And then from there, only once we have those do we take a step back. What are the competencies? What are the enablement formats, as I mentioned before? And then we have a sort of causation versus correlation conversation, right? We're always going to have that in enablement. But again, depending on your tools that you're likely to use, I think you have to agree on where we have that baseline, or we're going to use whatever tool we've used for that. We're going to measure it and monitor it on that. If we're going to run it for 3 months, we don't wait to 3 months till we get to the end. We measure it month over month, because if it's not going well, let's change quickly. But yeah, I think for us, for example, let's just look at discovery calls. Let's just say that your conversion, you want to improve your conversion rate from discovery to open opportunity, right? And so you're from one stage to the next. What is it now? Okay, let's look at it basically. Are we fitting into a specific sales methodology? Cool. Let's look. Are we hitting those things? We could use something like Gong or any other conversational intelligence platform. Are we getting the pain? Are we understanding the impact? Are we looking at these things? Like, for example, if your conversion rate is really low from like discovery to demo, and then probably more so from demo to proposal stage, or whatever your customer buying stages are, Why is that? Right? Like most of the time, and I think this has been a systemic problem in sales for a long time, is salespeople don't tend to get the pain or enough pain and certainly don't identify the impact. So if you don't understand the pain or the impact, it's really difficult for you to show value, right? So, and then again, if you manage to go from that element of understanding the pain and the problem, and then you get them to a demo, and then it makes sense to give them an onboarding call. You say, well, this button does this and this button does that, right? It's a pretty easy fix. In my opinion, it's a long-term fix, but again, you can work on, these are the questions that you can ask. You can then monitor that through things like Gong. Then we're using Salesforce to check the conversion rates, or even deal board on Gong or whatever it may be. That's what we do. But again, you've got to put a target against it and a timeline. But yeah, I think you start with a baseline, work backwards from what it is that you want to do, put some targets around it, understand that there's certain competencies that you're likely to pull for each one of these things. It could be a messaging thing. It could be, if it's more opportunities created, it could be around your opening. It could be around your questions that you're asking. It could be around your persona, right? You're talking to the wrong person. For example, when I worked at Andela, we did staff augmentation, and most new people who come in, especially SDRs, you would assume that we speak to HR because it's staff augmentation, but we didn't. We spoke to VPs of engineering. So again, it could be a tiny little switch like that, but we could look at the amount of meetings that we are having with, and we're not converting from discovery to demo, and 90% of the meetings we're having are with HR or talent acquisition. Okay, so let's work backwards from there. Again, it's all about getting the baseline, understanding where you're going, and then using the same metrics to measure the hopeful improvement.
Yeah, great. That makes sense. I think a lot of what we spoke about is the why. Why is it that you want to make this change? And I think you said it before, you wrap it all around in data, and therefore then you know where you're trying to get to, where you are currently, and how you've got to bridge the gap. And I'm a big believer in being data-led in everything that you do in the business world as well. So I'm really on board with that. But what I tend to struggle with, or what I've experienced at least, is making sure that the data is accurate. And so what I mean by that is when I've been a sales rep, I've also managed sales teams. And, when I was a sales rep, early in my career, I can comfortably say that I probably didn't upkeep my data entry into CRMs and things like this as much as I should have. And when I was managing a team, I can honestly say I tried to reprimand. Well, maybe reprimand's not the right word, but strong word with your
Oh, dangerous.
Oh, right.
Oh, he's one of those old school managers who's letting cat out of the bag.
There he is.
How do you ensure that reps are maintaining the data to a level it needs to be in order for you to be able to successfully do your job?
Well, isn't that the number one question around any data at the moment? I think, ironically, I think it goes back to the why that you mentioned, right? Why is it? You have to sort of sell reps on why it's important, right? And I think you have to have a certain level of comfort. I think it was like Colin Powell years ago. He said, like, if you can make a decision with between 40 and 70% of the data, right? As long as you trust in that data and where it comes from, as long as everyone is on the same page and in agreement that this is the data that we're going to use, right? I think that's the crucial thing for a business, for a project. I've worked at business. I mean, it's weird, right? You see on job descriptions, must know how to use Salesforce. I've used Salesforce. I've been in sales almost 20 years, and every company that has used Salesforce differently. So I think that's like a weird, spurious statement. But yeah, I think I would say that also every company I've probably been part of is in the middle of a data cleanup on Salesforce, right? It's like a DFS sale, right? It's always on. The data cleanup's always on, right? So, but yeah, I think you've just got to, on the rep side, you've got to sell them on why, right? I think that's the biggest thing, and it's what's in it for them. All these lovely things, but yeah, and then I think you've just got to. I think you've almost got to get agreement from whoever. So for me, this is when you have to identify the number one stakeholder. So for me, if it's the CRO, and we go, are you comfortable with us using this data to plan? Yes or no, right? If it's not, and say, okay, like, we'll do this in this sort of interim plan for the next 3 months, until we get enough data. We can enable reps on getting this stuff like that. But I think you've got to be comfortable with the plan ahead. You really need to have agreement from the person, right? It's not enough for me to agree in my team if the CRO or my boss is completely on a different page. So whatever that is, and as I say, like I think you struggle to find a company in the world who are utterly happy and they think that their data is perfect. So again, you've just got to get that agreement, and again, get that baseline, right? Understand that, like, look, this is the data we've got. Are you happy for us to use this? Yes, okay. And then we use the same parameters to measure it week over week, month over month. But yeah, I think going down to the operational level, you've just got to let people know why it is, right? And I don't think it's a stereotype for a reason that salespeople don't like inputting data, right? And the thing is, we're getting lots and lots of tools now that are taking that away, right? Lots and lots of tools, or they're automating things and stuff like that. Long may that continue, right? Because from a sales rep's point of view, I think the average is they're spending about less than 30% of their time selling. Right, so if we can automate that as much as possible, then great. But as long as we automate it and it's accurate, there's no point in automating terrible data, right?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Getting the buy-in on the data source from the main internal stakeholder is key in that as well. And yeah, with the I think Mick's gonna ask a question next, but I'm just gonna jump in here. As you said about the automation aspect of things as well, it's a good segue actually. One of the things that intrigues us at the moment is the involvement of AI within the tech stack in the B2B world. How do you see that playing out over the next 6-12 months? The world in terms of the kind of technology that's available now is so different to 12 months ago, just because the evolution and the pace of evolution is significant now. So how do you see that evolving with time?
You know what? It's a great question, and it's a question that everyone has to be thinking about right now. I think there's even through the Sales Enablement Collective, I think they had a session, I think it was in New York, where someone was talking about AI and enablement. So it's touching every role in business. I'll be honest, when it comes to platforms that's used the phrase AI, I'm still a little bit skeptical, because we've heard it for the last 2 or 3 years. I think in the last sort of 6 months, it's been hypercharged or put on steroids, and you've got all these links to Chat GPT-4 and all these things, and I think it's great. So I always approach it, if a vendor approaches me or someone talks about AI, I always approach it a little bit skeptically, because I've heard this pitch before. I'm happy to be convinced otherwise. And my other concern with AI, I think there's a difference between automation and laziness, right? And I think some of the things that I've seen, in my opinion, are bordering on lazy. Right, for example, I can't remember the name of the company, no disrespect to them, but we're seeing it a lot within sales now about automating sales coaching. I'm like, well, why do you need a sales manager then?
What does that mean?
Right, easy. So I think it just like gives transcripts and then gives suggestions based on the back of it. But what happens is that lots of these sales managers will then give those to enablement. So like, do you know what I mean? Like, and again, I've seen some really good AI on that side. Like, we work with a company called Atrium, and they've just got like this automated thing, and it brings it up, and it's great. As someone who was a sales leader for over 10 years, when I saw it, again, skeptically, when I saw it, I was like, brilliant. Right? If we're looking at this data very quickly, that's exactly where my head would have gone with this. And it was fresh, really, really fresh. But it's what people do with that information. And to say, I've been approached by someone, it's like, automate your role plays. Well, why though? Right? Like, so again, I'm just being a little bit skeptical. Like, am I a huge fan of role plays? I'm probably 50-50. But is there use in them? I think there is. But the use is you working with someone and doing it. It's like if you use Gong or a conversation intelligence, and all you do is you listen to that call and put comments. Yeah, I suppose you're kind of giving feedback, but you're not necessarily coaching. There's a huge difference between coaching and feedback. Feedback is an opinion on something that's already happened. Coaching has got the potential to inform future performance if you run through it, right? Like you, Mick, you know yourself, right? You come from a sporting background, similar to myself. If your coach should say, do better, run faster, cheers, no worries. Do you know what I mean? Well, good job, fantastic. But that's not what a coach gets paid for, right? A coach gets paid for, when you did this, you actually took off on your heel instead of your toe. Or when this happened and you reacted, you took a step backwards instead of taking a step forwards. So that made you know what I mean? Like, That's what a coach does. It's those nuances. And then if you move that into sales, it's like, you ask this question like this. How else do you think you could have asked that question to get even more information? You get the self-reflective piece. And I never want to lose that from sales because I think that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a little bit of a soapbox rant specifically on AI for sales coaching. But again, I'm seeing lots of people just don't want to do the job, right? Like they just want to press a button and someone else do it. So I'm excited for where AI can go. I'd be interested to see the difference between AI automation and AI laziness.
Yeah, bonus points to you, by the way, Kieran. Mick loves it when people bring up the fact he's got a sporting background. So
keep telling everyone the one wants to listen. I told you I was a sportsman. Just listen to me. Kieran, you said something around skill sets, and when you hire a person to join your enablement team, what do you feel like is the best background to look for, or the best skill set to be had to be a good enabler?
Great question. I think it's a mix. So I came from sales and sales leadership into enablement, and for me it was a conscious move. And I think I found very similar to sales. Lots of people fall into sales enablement. Maybe they get a little bit bored by being an SDR or an AE and they go, it's still within sales. I quite like that. And then you have people who come from like L&D across. Me personally, and I've just gone through some interviews recently, it's really interesting. I think, and I had a conversation with another enabler, Devin McDermott, who she's a really good person because she's like a VP of enablement, but she doesn't have a sales background. And it's like I've been to quite a few enablement summits, and it's like the number one question is like, how could you have credibility as an enabler if you don't have a sales background? And I would say, me personally, I would say that my sales background is my superpower and my kryptonite when it comes to being an enablement person. So I don't necessarily think I don't think it's necessary to do. I think it's an advantage. I think I do. I think if you've walked that world, but again, if someone, say for example, someone's only been an SDR, they come in to do enablement, and it depends on what the expectations of the enablement team are. But if that person's going to go and speak to AEs about closing deals, you're going to potentially struggle with credibility on that, right? And especially if you've got like a tenured rep, who sometimes can be difficult to get on side anyway. If you've got someone who's like 23, 24, has been an SDR for a couple of years, joins the enablement team and be like, right, everyone, we're going to do this role play on, finding the pain and getting the impact. They're like, well, you've probably never done this before. So again, I think it depends on what the expectations of the enablement team are, or the enablement role that you're hiring for. But I think firstly for me, the same as when I worked in sales, coachability is something I look for. No one's a finished article. So it's all about developing, and we've got certainly here at Staffbase, a strong ethos on everyone developing all the time. Again, one of the main reasons why I wanted to join. But other than that, I think I would ask some questions around, if you've never been in enablement before, what do you think enablement is? Like genuinely, right? I was actually talking to someone here at Staffbase this morning, and I was like, when I was at my last company, people, I want to be in an enablement team. I was like, do you know what we do? Oh yeah, you just like do the training sessions. I was like, that's the fun bit that you get to see. We do a whole lot of other things that are not that fun. But I think probably coachability, understanding of the sales world. I genuinely believe that to be a top level enabler, you need to be a little bit of a sales encyclopedia. You need to know what a sales methodology is, qualification methodology, the differences between them. You need to understand the sales cycle. What did some of these terms mean? I think you need to be to progress. I think you genuinely need that skill set. Other than that, project management experience, it's really difficult, right? Like I've ran teams and departments in the past, but when I come into enablement, it shocked me, right? Like because you're pulling so many different people and departments together, and you have to set expectations and set timelines. And if you want to be seen as that strategic business partner internally, the buck stops with you, right? And you've got to hold people accountable. And again, like stuff like that can be really quite difficult and daunting. And then other than that, just a decent enough person, right? I don't necessarily think I would hire someone or everyone who's exactly like me. But I mean, I've got an enablement team of 7 people. We've obviously got a certain team dynamic, and we need to kind of fit within that. You don't have to be the same, but and I mean, I've got one person from the UK, one person from Sweden, one person from Canada, 3 people from Germany. So that's a very culturally diverse team. So as I say, not everyone's different, but you have to sort of fit within that culture, and I think that'll always be part of it. But yeah, that's kind of how I would break it down.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Kieran, I feel like we could speak to you forever, as you seem to be a fountain of knowledge, but we do need to wrap up. And so we do have a bit of a tradition where we ask one final question, which is, in your career in the enablement space, what is your favorite memory so far?
Most people are going to cringe when I say this, but I was exceptionally proud of the work that we done with Gong when I was at Andela. We won a Golden Gong Award for best performance story. So to give you a bit of context, I joined Andela in the October of 21. I found out what a Golden Gong was in November, and I said I want to win one of them. Yeah. So myself and my good friend Joseph Tung, there was other people involved, but we were the main people. We put a year's worth of work into that, and we implemented it in everything that we did, from onboarding to coaching calls to coaching culture, all these other things. And yeah, at the end we moved the needle on some of these big metrics, and we won a Golden Gong. I've even got the trophy right next to me. It's like second prize, but third prize possession after my 2 kids. But yeah, no, that was my favorite memory, and I think also because it was like 12 months of work. It wasn't like a quick hit, right? It was 12 months of work. And for me, it was just like, spoke it into existence, worked hard towards it, and we achieved it. And I'm hoping to try and win another one at Staffbase. So
amazing, great memory. Well, thank you for joining us. This has been the Revenue Revolution podcast, sponsored by Jointflows. Until next time, thank you, Kieran.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you. Bye.